In 1952, a geologist discovered a 10,000-mile mountain range at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. When she showed her boss, he told her to redo her calculations, called it girl talk. She redid them. The mountains were still there. And they changed everything we know about how the Earth works. Here's something wild to think about. In 1948, we knew more about the visible surface of the moon than we knew about 70% of our own planet, the ocean floor. Most scientists assumed it was nothing, flat, featureless, just a millennia of sediment slowly piling up in the dark. This understanding of the ocean floor started to change with sonar. During World War II, the Navy got very interested in understanding what was under the water, for obvious reasons. And after the war, that technology became available for scientific research. Which brings us to Columbia University, 1948, and a young woman named Marie Tharp. Marie Tharp had an unusual background. Her father was a soil surveyor for the USDA. He made maps of farmland across the country. She'd grown up following him into the field, watching him translate data into pictures of the ground. She went to college for English and music, but then World War II happened, and suddenly geology programs that had been closed to women opened up because the men were overseas fighting. Tharp got a master's in geology from the University of Michigan. Then, not satisfied, she picked up another degree in mathematics. Geology plus math, plus a childhood spent watching her father make maps, that combination was about to matter a lot. In 1948, she landed a job at Columbia's Lamont Geological Observatory. She was assigned to assist a graduate student named Bruce Heesen, who was working on a project to map the ocean floor. Now here's the thing. Heesen got to go to sea. He sailed on research vessels, operated the sonar equipment, collected the data. Tharp didn't. Women weren't allowed on research ships. It was considered bad luck, old sailor superstition. There were no accommodations for women, and frankly, it was a boys' club, and nobody was in a hurry to change that. So the arrangement was, Heesen goes to sea, collects thousands of sonar soundings. Tharp stays in a basement lab in New York and turns those soundings into maps. What Heesen brought back looked something like an EKG readout, a long paper strip with a squiggly line showing depth measurements. Tharp's job was to take those readings, thousands of them, and figure out what the ocean floor actually looked like. She did this by hand, with a ruler, a pen, and a lot of patience. And here's the thing she said about that work. I love this quote. "I had a blank canvas to fill with extraordinary possibilities. It was a once-in-a-lifetime, a once-in-the-history-of-the-world opportunity." Most people would see stuck in a basement while the men go on adventures as a raw deal, but Tharp saw it as a chance to draw the first real picture of most of the planet. So Tharp starts plotting. She creates profiles, basically cross-sections running east to west across the Atlantic, 6 of them at different latitudes. And every single one shows the same thing. There's a ridge running down the middle of the Atlantic. Scientists already knew about that. It's called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. But in the center of that ridge, Tharp finds something nobody expected, a valley, a V-shaped notch cutting right down the middle of that mountain range. She recognized what that was. It looked exactly like a rift valley, the kind of formation you'd see on land when 2 pieces of crust are pulling apart. The Great Rift Valley in East Africa is the famous example. And if there was a rift valley at the bottom of the Atlantic, that meant the seafloor was splitting apart, magma rising up from below, cooling, pushing the 2 sides away from each other. That meant the continents on either side of the Atlantic were moving. Now, you have to understand the context here. The idea that continents move, continental drift, it was considered fringe science in the 1950s. A German scientist named Alfred Wegener had proposed it back in 1912, and he'd basically been laughed out of the room. The head of Tharp's own observatory, Maurice Ewing, was fiercely anti-drift. Bringing it up was career poison. So when Tharp showed Heesen what she'd found, his reaction was not enthusiasm. He groaned and said, "It cannot be. It looks too much like continental drift." And then he dismissed it, called it girl talk, told her to redo her calculations. So Tharp went back into the data. She replotted everything from scratch. The Rift Valley was still there. Meanwhile, Heesen had taken on a side project for Bell Laboratories. They were planning to lay transatlantic telephone cables, and they needed to know where the earthquakes happened so that they wouldn't put cables in danger. Heesen was mapping earthquake epicenters across the Atlantic floor. Months of work, 2 separate projects, 2 separate maps. And then they put them together. Tharp's Rift Valley, Heezen's earthquake epicenters. They lined up perfectly. The earthquakes were happening exactly where Tharp said the seafloor was splitting apart. That's when Heezen finally believed her. But convincing one colleague wasn't the same as convincing the scientific establishment. Continental drift was still hearsay. They needed more proof. And they got it from an unlikely source. Jacques Cousteau, the famous French explorer, was a skeptic. He didn't buy the Rift Valley theory, so he decided to go film it himself and prove Tharp and Heezen wrong. He sailed out to the mid-Atlantic ridge, dropped a camera down into the depths, and filmed what was there. A rift valley, exactly where Tharp said it would be. Cousteau presented that footage at the 1959 International Oceanographic Congress, and at that point, the evidence was undeniable. Tharp and Heezen kept mapping. The Atlantic was just the beginning. In 1957, they published the first detailed map of the North Atlantic floor. It shows ridges, canyons, mountains, some of them even taller than Everest, nothing like the flat, featureless plain scientists had imagined. 1961, the South Atlantic. 1964, the Indian Ocean. And in 1977, they published the big one, the World Ocean Floor Panorama, a complete map of the entire ocean floor, painted by the Austrian artist Heinrich Baran, based on Tharp and Heezen's data. That map revealed something staggering. The mid-ocean ridge system, the underwater mountain chain Tharp had discovered, runs for more than 40,000 miles. It circles the entire planet. It's the longest mountain range on Earth, longer than the Andes, the Rockies, and the Himalayas combined. And it marks the boundaries where the Earth's crust is pulling apart and new seafloor is being created. By the way, if you're into maps, be sure to check out our website, worldmapsonline.com. I'll leave a link in the description below. This was the evidence that changed geology forever. Seafloor spreading is real. Continental drift is real. And those ideas became the foundation for plate tectonics, the theory that Earth's outer shell is broken into massive plates that move, collide, and reshape the planet over millions of years. Every earthquake, every volcano, every mountain range, plate tectonics explains it. And it all started with a woman in a basement, plotting sonar readings with a ruler. Tharp compared it to the Copernican revolution, and I think that's right. She said scientists and the general public got their first relatively realistic image of a vast part of the planet that they could never see. Before Tharp, we were blind to most of the Earth. After Tharp, we could finally see it. Now here's the hard part of this story. Marie Tharp's name wasn't on the key scientific papers published between 1959 and 1963. When those papers were presented at major conferences, it was Heezen at the podium. Tharp was in the basement making more maps. Her own assessment at the time? I was so busy making maps, I let them argue. Which is both admirable and kind of heartbreaking, right? She was doing the work, they were taking the credit. She did eventually get recognized. In 1978, the National Geographic Society awarded her and Heezen the Hubbard Medal, their highest honor. Previous winners include Ernest Shackleton, Jane Goodall, the Leakeys. Heezen had died the year before, so Tharp received it in both of their names. In 1997, the Library of Congress named her one of the 4 greatest cartographers of the 20th century. And just recently, in 2022, the U.S. Navy renamed one of their survey ships, the USNS Maui, became the USNS Marie Tharp. So the recognition came, eventually. Decades late, but it came. Always the detailed work, rarely the credit. Tharp's discovery was too big to erase, but she had to prove it twice. Once to discover the Rift Valley, and again when she was told to redo her calculations because a man didn't want to believe her. Girl talk. That's what they called the discovery of the largest geological feature on Earth. Marie Tharp spent her career in a basement lab, not allowed on the ships that collected her data, translating numbers into pictures of places no human had ever seen. She mapped 70% of our planet. She provided the evidence that proved continents move. She changed how we understand the ground beneath our feet. And she did it with a ruler, India ink, and thousands of sonar readings. So next time you see a map of the ocean floor, any map of the ocean floor, you're looking at Marie Tharp's work. She gave us our first real picture of most of our planet. Not bad for girl talk.